So,
Deeply concerning.
South Africa is fighting back. Not just the ANC government, the party of Nelson Mandela, but also the Afrikaans minority as well. And there's two different stories layered over one another. And to understand this, you've sort of got to follow the back and forth between the South African government and the US government, because this has been the accelerant to kick all of this off. So the thing that started it all really is Cyril Ramaphosa signed an expropriation bill into law, and what this did was it allowed the government to expropriate land or take people's land and not pay them for it. Compensation part of it was optional. So in theory, you could be a farmer and the government can say, I want your land, and they don't give you anything for it, even though you owned it. And of course, this is obviously an erosion of private property rights. They don't really exist in South Africa because the government can just take things from you. And
well, we've got that under the Labour government who want to take farms away at not even market price. So this is a halfway house to that.
It is indeed. And this was obviously to target the white minority in South Africa because, of course, the ANC has made it its business to whip up anger at this minority and blame their failings to keep the infrastructure they had functional. And so they're distracting people from their inability to govern by saying, well, look at all of these white farmers. They own all the land, therefore they're greedy, they're taking things from you. When in reality, they're incompetent and quite often very corrupt. Everyone knows that corruption in South Africa is rife. And a lot of the time, these things are not being done because there's someone being paid. And also, that it's worth mentioning, these land expropriations, quite often, when they're actually there marking up the farms to take them, there are politicians on the ground saying, oh, well, I'll have this bit. And so they're directly benefiting from it. They know that they're the ones that get to choose which farms get taken, and they can take some for themselves. And they said, don't be alarmed, the court may award you nil compensation, but it's not required to, so it's okay. And of course, this is not reassuring whatsoever, because you're still at the mercy of the courts as to whether your livelihood is ruined. And then eventually, America caught wind of this. Trump cut US financial aid to South Africa, citing his disapproval of the laws and also their foreign policy aims, in that South Africa brought the genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, and it was a sort of punitive measure on top of that for that as well. Obviously, a close American ally. And then you see Elon Musk, of course, being South African, saying the legacy media never mentions the white genocide in South Africa because it doesn't fit their narrative that whites can be victims. And I think that that's very true. And in fact, what is happening in South Africa is awful for the white minority. We complain a lot about what's going on in Britain and Europe and North America, but we can't really hold a candle to the suffering that's going on in South Africa, because some of the most appalling things I've ever heard of are going on there. And many of the white South Africans gathered and supported what Trump said, because it's very significant. You know, the leader of the free world, as they say, coming out and pointing out your persecution. And they were very positive about that. And you only need to look at the number of race laws in South Africa, and you can see that big dip towards the end of apartheid, and then you can see that it actually rises above the sort of apartheid level under the ANC governance. And of course, all of these laws, they're not discriminating against the native black population, they're discriminating against the white population. That's why those laws exist. And the ANC...
Do they have similar sorts of laws now that just literally state it's white who will, like we're about to see in a potential sentencing council, you know, if you're white or you're historically white, not only will you lose your land, you can't get a job or...
Oh, it's very egregious. Like... I'm going to go through some of the examples soon, and it is very explicit. And... South African president says the persecution of whites is a false narrative, and Elon Musk doubled down on this. The ANC line has basically been, they're making it up, they're far right, they're racist. It sounds very familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And a court ruled that the claims of white genocide are not real. This was a South African court.
Oh, okay.
And so it's basically like we've ruled ourselves innocent. Yeah.
Yeah, judging our own judgments.
Exactly. And then they were in sort of a bit of diplomatic warfare here. They hinted at a nuclear deal with Iran and Russia. And what's common about those two nations? Oh, wait, they're both enemies of the United States. And so the United States... Oh, you're going to say something, Stelios?
No, it's just you're talking about Cyril Ramaphosa, and I think it's good to tell to the audience that this is not the politicians who goes out and chants death to the Boers.
That's right. No? That's Julius Malema.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Although he hasn't disavowed that chant, by the way. He's never said anything against it. And in response, the US supported a French company investing in gas in Mozambique. And so if the South Africans do get this project underway, a neighbouring country is going to have cheaper energy than them anyway. And so it's undermined that effort. And there's a bit of a battle going on here. Basically, Trump freed up $4.7 billion US dollars to a French company that was frozen since 2021. But that's not the focus necessarily. Mm-hmm. It's just interesting that it happened. And then the US expelled the South African envoy after, I think he called Trump a white supremacist, and they said he was race baiting and basically sent him packing, which is fair enough, I think, because that was what he was doing, really.
Yeah.
And then let's look at some examples of clear discrimination here. So a cricket team, very English export here, but they were kicked out of a competition for failing to select at least 3 black players for the competition. I've heard of a story of, in a rugby match, in the last minute, someone was injured, and then they brought on a substitute for the last minute of the game, and because the substitute wasn't a black player and the player was black, all of a sudden they fell underneath their quota and they were disqualified from the tournament, even though, the majority of the game
had already been won.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you might think, okay, well, this is sport. It's not the end of the world. Well, as has been, it's still important. It's still part of your culture.
In many ways, it is a really important part of the world because it's our escape. It's our way of looking away from what's happening around us, the job implications that we have, the bosses that are talking to us, what's going on at home. It's our chance to be free and to enjoy just the sport. And we don't want to be interfered with by government diktat rules like that. And I find it oppressive that when we get an opportunity just to relax, they're even imposing their ideology on us then.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Sports, because sports is basically the paradigm for most people for what fair competition looks like.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you can see here, this is a declaration by employee, and you can see employees should use terms to ascertain which employees are from designated groups in terms of the Employment Equality Act of 1998. And then you go down here, designated groups mean black people, women, and people with disabilities. So we see lots of DEI policies in Western countries, but it's very, very explicit. What's that? Sorry,
you've got the rules of the Sentencing Council up there, I'm sure.
You do. do indeed, yeah. In a manner of speech.
Sorry.
It's also worth mentioning here that the box is African, coloured, Indian, and white. The term coloured is a sort of colonial holdover. It just means mixed race, basically, but they're afforded similar privileges to those of African descent, and it's actually quite often the Indian and white residents that are discriminated against by these laws. And the riots in 2021, lots of Indians were actually targeted because they believed that the Indians were unfairly extracting wealth from their country, and they burnt down lots of distribution centres, which massively damaged their economy and achieved very little politically. But we can... page 4. So this has some good stats on it. It says this is the data on farming. So apparently 72% of the total farms and agriculture holdings by individual landowners are owned by whites, and so that is the majority of farms. And the government's own data suggests that 90% of farms that have been redistributed failed. So this is their own internal data. So this is interesting because, of course, you look at somewhere like Zimbabwe, or formerly Rhodesia, as I like to call it. They took all of the white farmers' land, and then 1 million people starved to death.
Yes.
And obviously a massive human tragedy, not in anyone's interest to have that outcome. And what happened is that people it was sort of like this cargo cult behavior. They didn't realize that the reason that the white farmers were producing so much of their food, say, is because they're using different agricultural techniques. There are lots of things that you need to do, particularly in somewhere like South Africa that's perhaps a more difficult climate to farm in than, say, Britain. There are lots of things you need to do. There's lots of complicated machinery. There's a lot more to it than you might think. It's not just putting seeds in the ground and waiting. And I think that people tend to have a very naive view of what goes into farming. And if anyone's watched Clarkson's Farm, they need not imagine that it's actually a very difficult job. And I think that what's playing out in South Africa is that they see a farm as just an easy way of getting wealth. It's your key to becoming wealthy, when actually there's a lot of hard work that goes into it, and it is a way of life that has to be passed down, because if you don't have that knowledge passed on to you, you're really going to struggle. And that's true of anyone, regardless of...
They want to get hold of it and then just sell it on to the major large corporates.
That's
who
also another
possibility. Run it for you, and they just can do a flip. Which is what I see here is one of the main things when we're trying to impoverish our farmers, bankrupt them through inheritance tax, give them the opportunity for the councils to be able to do compulsory purchase orders at less than market rate, is so that they can flip it to companies that are going to put wind farms on solar panel, or be a large intermediate for the American companies that will come in and buy the land and then rent it out to the same farmers.
It wouldn't surprise me if the same thing's going on here.
Yep.
So the land grabbers are already operating, and as you can see here, you just get crowds of people that just turn up and try and get their parcel, usually with a politician in tow, adjudicating it and also carving out a nice piece for themselves. And it's worth pointing as well that if you are a white farmer, one of the farm tools that might not be familiar to you as a European or North American, well, maybe not North American, but as a European farmer, is that you have to have an assault rifle by you at all times, because you're in constant danger of the farmland attacks. And of course, this was investigated by Lauren Southern when she looked at the farmland murders, where white farmers had their farms invaded. And there's a really horrible case here. I'm going to summarize what he's saying because the video is 6.5 minutes long, but he's a former police officer who's talking about his first farm murder. And let me just tell you about what happened here. 5 men waited for the family to return from church before attacking them. The father and grandfather were bludgeoned to death with hammers. The wife was sexually assaulted at gunpoint by 4 different people. The 13-year-old daughter was sexually assaulted 3 times and stabbed in the back of the head, but thankfully survived. And then they had written political slogans in blood on the walls. And apparently the interior of the house was so thick with blood that when the police officers actually stepped on it, it was seeping out of the carpets beneath them. This is the kind of thing that the white South Africans have to face. This is not something that any human being should have to face, especially not people who are disproportionately productive for their country. They're taxed far more than others. They're discriminated against by the law, and they're also providing a disproportionate amount of the food for the country. It strikes me as very ungrateful that they're basically doing all the hard work to prop up what is essentially becoming a failed state here, and their reward is some of the worst political persecution in the world. And
what does the left about it in this country say? Nothing, just as they say nothing
silence,
about our farmers, just as they say nothing against the farmers in Holland, or the same in Canada.
Well, they don't vote for the left-wing parties, do they?
Exactly.
So what you're seeing here is not a prison. This is a South African household's bedroom. This is it gated off from the rest of the house for security, because this is not some paranoid weirdo. This is a necessary measure. And to the to Europe and North America, this is completely unthinkable. I get worried when I see the bars in certain continental European countries on their windows and things like that. I think that's a bit excessive, isn't it? But to have them in your own homes,
like the bars you see in certain parts of the United States when you drive through, it's actually really, really scary and abysmal.
Mm-hmm.
It's inhuman.
So let's get on to the EFF, or the Economic Freedom Fighters, which is a very ironic name. So they're communists and black nationalists, as you might expect, and they're headed by Julius Malema. He's refused to testify that he would not call for the murder of whites in the future, but he did testify that he might call for the slaughter of whites in the future when asked by a journalist. Interesting. And there are still people in South Africa that are saying that the problems of apartheid still exist. Here she's saying, "My book, No White Lies, White Power and Black Politics in South Africa reveals the ugly truth that white South Africans have failed to repent for and make reparations for apartheid sins." Interesting that they're using religious language there, isn't it? We remained privileged, entitled and arrogant in democratic South Africa. It is shameful that we have no moral compass and have ever offered reparations for all the harm we have caused. So let's point out the fact that she has actually contributed for the EFF. So she is a communist. That's worth pointing out.
Is it not worth pointing out that the party that she's supporting would actually kill her?
I know, yeah. A bit of a quisling, isn't she?
I just find that really odd. By the way, here's the target. I'll just help you out, and then just kill me after you've won.
Mm-hmm. It's
I just don't understand these people. Do any of us really understand what's going on between their ears? Can we understand how they've got this self-implosion of wanting to kill themselves, wipe themselves out, just for the sake of the Communist Manifesto?
I might do a bit of armchair psychologizing and say that they hate themselves and therefore they're inflicting their own self-hatred on the world. That would be my best guess. But then you had this. This was in 2023. This is the EFF rally where they're singing the song about killing the Boer. And imagine you lived in South Africa and this was a stadium full of people that are happy to sing about killing you.
Yes.
Would you be happy to, appear in public life? No wonder you have places like Orania where they're white-only towns, because at least they can feel safe knowing that they have people that aren't going to murder them for their property. And then Elon... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just I wanted to say that this is why culture is important, because if someone did this here, most probably they'd go in jail. It's incitement to violence.
Mm-hmm. We haven't quite got to this point yet, but it is certainly on the right track to becoming a reality here as well.
Well, I think sometimes we hear it on the streets when we're talking about the way that we look at Israel and Jewish people. It's a similar sort of conceptual idea that they're chanting when they're supporting Hamas in such numbers. That how far is that link? Isn't that fine line that we've been talking about, this thin thread between democratic values and murder caused by this level of hatred? Are we not on that line? Which is why we're all debating this so strongly and stridently.
It's also here to a certain extent, because I can use the example of in France, where there was the case of that teenage boy who got shot by the French police for refusing to stop his car. And then a group of 15 to 20 Muslims went to a small French town of about 140 people, went to an event and stabbed a 16-year-old to death because he was a French boy. Yeah. And it was purely racial. It's purely motivated about ethnic revenge. It's already here. It doesn't necessarily need to be the government doing it, but we already live amongst people that are more than happy to do this sort of thing. Now, Elon Musk has got a bit of a vendetta against the EFF, as one can imagine. And he says, very few people know that there is a major political party in South Africa that is actively promoting white genocide, which I think is a fair characterization. They explicitly sing songs about killing them. They make gun sounds. They talk about shooting the farmers. It's about as explicit as it could possibly be. And the defense of the South African government is it's just political terminology. It's just hyperbole. If only we had such lax standards in Britain for that sort of thing. Maybe not to to favour the minorities. But anyway, a month ago, the South African government passed a law legalising taking property from white people at the will with no payment. Where is the outrage? Why is there no coverage by the legacy media? Starlink can't get a licence to operate in South Africa simply because I'm not black. How is that right? And in fact, South Africa is the only country in Southern Africa that has refused them, and it seems to be out of spite. Because, of course, they could do with the infrastructure. They're not in a position to choose. And then Malema responded to Elon Musk saying, we must not be intimidated by him, and our friends will never be the United Kingdom, France, or the USA. They were never there for us during difficult times. Palestine was there for us. Okay. Interesting. I don't remember all those Palestinians helping in the apartheid era.
Yeah, was there a secret cohort of ANC Palestine?
I do know that the ANC was funded by lots of enemies of the United States, though. So that's interesting. And yes, it's here's them chanting it on Human Rights Day in South Africa, which is a wonderful irony. It's also worth mentioning as well that he's not just some obscure figure. He's got quite a bit of reach there, 4.4 million followers. I imagine a decent portion of them are following in horror more than anything, but it's still worth mentioning he has a sizable platform. He's not just nobody. And then here is Marco Rubio. I don't know why he's here, because that link is not meant to be that high up. Okay. The links seem to be a bit messed up. Let's just skip that stuff, because you get the gist by this point. They're not very nice people. But there was a documentary released by a group called AfriForum, which is an Afrikaans group in South Africa that is trying to advocate for the minority there that are being persecuted. And there are a couple of groups that are actually pushing against this sort of thing. And I want to draw people's attention to them because I think they're doing great work. This documentary was excellent. They were pointing out the laws that discriminate against them. They were looking at the data. It was very factual, very data-based, very worth watching. And they're doing some great work. It was presented by this gentleman here, and he's got a quote here from this documentary. Under ANC rule, the South African sections of the media have long an unfortunate history of targeting citizens who speak out against race-based politics or violent crime, with some commentators seeing their role in such situations more as regime attack dogs rather than watchdogs against the abuse of power, which is very much true, I think. And they've lamented the fact that the media in South Africa has basically been trying to say that they're white supremacist or they're bigoted and extremist and should be ignored. And they're using things like screenshots of a headline, opinion pieces, political cartoons, their opinion, and the word of ANC officials, and
Dude,
just calling it...
Dude, trust me.
And just calling it...
That's a racist term for a black guy. I thought dude was supposed to be a white man's term.
Is it? I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, brother is, the black man, dude is the white man.
Okay, fair enough.
Aren't they being racist? Should that not be banned? It might be a bit too controversial here.
But the point being...
ANC mobs will be after me next.
I wouldn't be surprised.
To add to the list.
But yeah, these are the sorts of things that are being used to rebut the arguments. There aren't really any real rebuttals because there is clear evidence in the law that there is this discrimination. And they tried to challenge this in a court, and the court said that actually it's a legitimate political expression and that it should stay. And they tried to appeal this, and I'm not sure if it actually stuck. And they've been pointing out that the Constitution, which supposedly vowed not to have racial discrimination, no longer protects everyone in the country because, of course, the chant such as kill the Boer, which is calling for the murder of Afrikaners, that's obvious, that's explicitly what it's saying. The Constitutional Court has shown total disrespect, as he says, for those people, basically, and they're trying to fight it, which is a very commendable action, and it's amazing that they can stay so calm and collected and reasoned in such a difficult situation. And of course, Ramaphosa was silent about this because he secretly approves but doesn't want the negative PR of saying so. And then... where's this article gone? There was an article here, Samson, if you could pull that up, where it's talking about how South Africa and the Cape more generally is an invisible choke point. And this was done by Robert Dugan, I think, who's involved in some of these groups. And basically this is a shorter version of what's being handed out to lots of Western politicians, and it points out that there's actually a strategic advantage of having control of this passageway, because the passage around the Cape is actually a lot narrower than you think because of the difficult waters, and so shipping has to come very close to South Africa. And what I think is a very good political reason for pushing this argument is that the US or Britain might have a stake in South Africa if they see, okay, well, this benefits trade and shipping, and therefore we want to be more invested. I don't know why that's not coming up. Never mind. But yes, the article's called The Invisible Choke Point, if you want to look for it. But yes, I think that... there we go. That's weird. I had the wrong thing. That was my fault, Samson. So yes, it seems like a good way of getting people invested in South African politics, saying, listen, you'll have an advantage here because there's an excellent image here of shipping. Here we go. You can see a heat map, and most ships come within the coast and within the sort of waters of South Africa. And if you want to preserve the shipping and, say, prevent the Chinese or the Russians, who the ANC are sympathetic towards, from accessing this valuable shipping lane, maybe you want a stake in this area, which is clever politics, in my opinion, and is a good way of saying, actually, there is a good reason to be involved in South Africa. Come and help us, and you'll get something in return, which is a good way of looking at it. But yes, this is another movement. This basically started off as a trade union, and now they run as a sort of parallel government. They build schools, universities, and have private security, and they rely on community donations to keep these Afrikaans communities safe and not under the ire of the ANC and their supporters and the EFF. And there's also one final one that I want to draw attention to, which is the SAAI, which is a network that supports farmers both in South Africa and Zimbabwe. And so I think they were
I really
operating.
There was any
charity.
white farmers left in Zimbabwe. I thought the pogrom was so strong that if you've got to be incredibly strong and brave to want to stay there in that nation.
Yeah. I think there must be. I've not looked into it in great detail, but I know of the fact that there is at least a small portion of people that are still there after all of that.
After all of that,
which is amazing.
Serious lunacy going on in that country.
But my point being that whilst the government of South Africa pushes back against Trump, there's also people, the Afrikaners, pushing back against the ANC and, making these documentaries highlighting the points that Trump is making. And I think that they have a very, very valid claim here to be persecuted. You can see it in the law, you can see it in how they're treated in society, you can see it in the fact that their livelihoods can be destroyed for no reason at all other than a government official wants it to be so. And I think it's one of those things that is a rather overlooked tragedy and something that is entirely preventable. It's entirely created by the South African government, and it need not be this way, because if they do what they intend to do and take the land from these white farmers, what they're going to do is create another Zimbabwe situation where lots of people starve. They struggle to even have electricity or running water now. The infrastructure has gone downhill since the end of apartheid, basically. They had more electricity hours and clean water then than they do now because people loot the infrastructure.
And of course, the massive impact of this would be that if South Africa goes into a failed state scenario, it provides a lot of jobs and economic activity for surrounding countries, Namibia going up across. If that collapses, then once again we'll see a migration crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And we already know that one of the central causes of the migration crisis is coming up through Central Africa, which are starting to bring more and more people up through the Western Mediterranean route up through Libya, who are all subject to seriously nastier arms of the people smuggling gangs. These people are really capturing them and using them as slaves first before allowing them to get onto the boats to come over to ourselves.
Well, the Libyans have open slave markets. They're not very shy about it, and it's just set to create a wave of human tragedy in which no one benefits from. If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.